Good morning, welcome to Core Services and our Core Belief Series, Why It Matters. Today we're going to start a study of case studies on some internal control failures we have identified during the course of our audit engagements. I'm John Coggle and I'm the presenter of today's episode. So a little bit about Core Services. We are focused on audits and reviews of condominiums and HOAs in Oregon and Washington. We have over 40 years combined experience working with these types of engagements. And we also offer board advisory services to where we can help the boards make more effective decisions by really getting to understand their goals and how we can get there. So the case study we're going to do today is about when management had exceeded a budget item and what we ended up discovering and how we handled it. So when we receive the financial statements, the first thing we do is we do a budget to actual comparison, and we look for things where there was substantial actual expenditures over budget. In this one case, we found where management had spent $50,000 on operating maintenance, where the original budget was set for $35,000. Okay, it's not a problem. We go back to management and say, look, the board set the spending limit at 35, you ended up at 50. Show us where the board approved this, please. Tell us where in the minutes we can find this. The management came back and said, well, we really didn't discuss this with the board because we figured they were ordinary necessary expenditures. Okay, so obviously we can't just get the information that easily. So our next step is to go back to the board and say, look, can you review these and say you're okay with it? We think it's a breakdown of the internal control structure still, but nevertheless, approval after the fact is still a sufficient audit evidence for us. So we went back to the board, and the board stated that management never brought the cost overruns to their attention. They never discussed it, never asked for approvals, and when we brought this statement back to management, they said, well, but they received the monthly financial statements and it always is shown that we had overspent the budget, and they never questioned it. Classic he said, she said argument. Our next step is obviously, okay, can we dig a little deeper to try to find some way to verify the expense? What we ended up finding is that the maintenance expenses were actually paid to the management company. In a lot of cases, they were over $2,500, which was the association's limit before there had to be a competitive bid, or at least three companies proposing on it. A lot of the $50,000 was actually never put out to bid, and they were all over $2,500. And we actually found where in one instance they had swapped an approved supplier, contractor, and stated that they were going to do the work in place of that contractor, because the contractor felt that he couldn't do it for the amount he bid. But obviously there was no proof of that. There was nothing written. They didn't make any notes for a phone call contemporaneously. It was not good. And actually then when we started going through and digging through the minutes, we actually found where two of the jobs that management performed, they'd actually submitted proposals to do it, and the board had rejected those two proposals. And said we would prefer to hire independent contractors, but management did the work anyhow. So obviously this is what we consider a material weakness of the internal control structure. It's just things have to have approval. Somebody has to be able to correct for it, and in this case, it's recognizing that the budget in any type of homeowners association is a spending limit. And so when it says it's Y dollars, management just can't go off and spend additional money because it feels like it's necessary. And revenues are not going to increase. This is not like a for-profit business where if I triple my revenues, my costs are going to go up. All associations are spending driven. So we agree to spend a certain amount of money, and then we assess to cover that plus a small contingency for things to go wrong. So violating that is a bad thing. When management overriding the board's decision, when the board said no in their oversight capacity and management continues to do it anyhow, that's a significant breakdown in recognizing the board's authority to set policy. And ultimately, when we go back and we started looking at management structure, the management company structure, there was no one in the organization whose job it was to review interactions with management between them and their association clients to ensure that the work being performed was appropriate and approved. So in light of all that, there was no way we could issue an audit report. We ended up having to withdraw from the engagement. It was such that we couldn't even disclaim. Um, you know, Management could not provide any support to their assertion that the existence assertion was correct. They couldn't prove they were authorized to give themselves the money. And when there was evidence that they presented a proposal, in some cases those were rejected, and yet they did the work and paid themselves anyhow, which ultimately calls into questions management's integrity. If I can't believe management's statements, we cannot effectively do a financial statement audit. It is all about integrity. So why does it matter? Okay, so for managers who are listening to this, the board set policy, and that begins with the spending limit, that budget. You are given permission to spend to a certain amount, and if things exceed what the board wants as far as contract approval limits, you have to comply. It's not up to you to decide whether the board's policies are reasonable or not. It's their policy. It's their neighbor's money. You don't get to decide these things. It's theirs. Boards, you have the responsibility of oversight. So when you notice the spending going above limit, you need to document that in the minutes. You need to state whether you approve going over that, and if necessary, maybe even considering going back to the owners and asking for a special assessment to address these spending needs. You can't just assume management is always looking out for you. You'd think that would be the case, but it is not always the case. And for boards, recognize that management implements your policies. So if you basically give management the permission to create the budget, and then you just rubber stamp it, please understand you are probably not acting prudently in your role as an oversight board. You want to make sure that management always comes back to you for permission to get an authorization to exceed any budget classification you've set. And ultimately, if you're not certain, make management restate it. Management's financial information that they're presenting to you at a board meeting should be clear and explain what you are facing. And if management's financial statements don't make sense and their explanations don't make sense, you need to call timeout and maybe consider bringing in somebody to help you understand what is going on. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. You can always find us on the web at www.core-acct.com. Feel free to write to me on Twitter if you have questions. And you can also find us on LinkedIn. Feel free to go out there and send us a message. We enjoy interacting, and we love the idea of being a board's resource for better decision making. Have a great day. We look forward to our next presentation.